And one thing that we really love is continuous deployment. And what I mean by continuous deployment, our clients' business models change very often. And our users are always wanting for the next new feature. So we're not in a position to say, well, we'll take these 100 change requests and spend 3 months developing all of them and then release that every quarter. We're releasing new features as soon as they get tested and go off. This week, we've released, I think, 4 releases this week, and it's Wednesday. And to do that, we have to have a very rigorous test environment, a very rigorous development process, but the cloud gives us that ability to, whenever it's ready, we get the feature out. And we get a lot of feedback back that's allowing us to continue to deploy and refine our software for our users. And then a benefit is bandwidth. Again, if you have a physical infrastructure, you have a limited set of bandwidth. And oftentimes, if you find you need to increase that, it could be several months for you to get that increased. And then you have to go through a lot of piping to get all that right and then release that to your users. Whereas really the bandwidth in the cloud is sort of thrown back to that internet connection. So the end users need that internet connection, and if right now in the day's market you have the Fios and you have Comcast, which provides a good bit of bandwidth for any kind of small business or any kind of healthcare clinic. So after all that, that's sort of the big why. And the how, and just sort of show you how we're doing it at Jack Russell Software, is there's a couple of projects that you can do. If it's a greenfield project, you know, it's much easier to get started in the cloud, to use infrastructure as a service, use platforms like RightScale, which got some free swag from them, by the way, or Heroku, and others that really help you manage your infrastructure, and they can give you that boost so that you don't have to deal with the IT side of the situation. Convert an internal app. There may be some old VB6 apps lying around that you're using, and the users would love to be able to use them on their iPad, or they would love to be able to use them on the web. And it may not be a big effort to take that. So convert it and see how that works. See how the user's experience changes when they are able to see that they ask for a request and they get it the next day. That's a big difference from a user's experience. So this very complex fuzzy diagram is how we sort of serve most of our applications in the cloud. We use infrastructure as a service, and these are our databases, and all these databases are very secured, and we use Amazon Web Services, and we use their security model to make sure that they're all isolated. So none of our clients' data can interming, no other data in the cloud can interming with that, and that gives us control, but we have the responsibility to make sure that these data servers are secure. Amazon gives us the tooling to keep that secure. And then our applications sit on a platform as a service, just like a RightScale or a Heroku, and that gives us this dial. So we deploy our apps and we say we want to run 10 servers. And then we look and we get some volume coming in, and we need to run 20. We can turn that dial, and within 5 minutes or less, we're running 20 servers. And you can run that dial up or down dynamically, which really provides a huge advantage for us. As well as one of the other things is with continuous deployment, you don't have to ask the users to go downstairs to the lobby to take a break for 5 or 10 minutes so that we can deploy the new release. It just happens, or you don't have to ask your developers to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning to deploy the release. It just happens, and that release happens. And it's the same sort of process that the Amazons, the Googles, all of the other software companies that serve their software, like a Facebook, you know, they don't necessarily say, hey, we're going to be down for a day so we can deploy these new changes so you can't use us. They just deploy the changes. And that kind of rapid cycle is infectious. Users love to see that change as long as it's put in the proper context. In other words, that you understand that you need to deliver, you know, valid release documentation so that they know when that change is coming, you know, and they're not sort of totally surprised. So, you know, we do parallel release notes building as the features are being built so that we're able to spread the word so that if all of a sudden their favorite blinky dot is no longer in the same spot, they don't freak out. But more often than not, they really do enjoy that change. And that's pretty much it. Any questions? I don't know how I'm on time. I'm probably a little fast.
Tom, thank you very much indeed.
Sure.
In your company, do you have any healthcare applications using the cloud, the HIPAA compliant infrastructure you were talking about?
Yes, we've got 2 in production right now. We have a custom EMR that's been in production for over a year now by nurse practitioners that actually do house calls in the Philadelphia area. And they use it to be able to manage the records, and they actually pull the records in an offline architecture so that they can go into the home and not have to have an internet connection, but then when they are able to connect back up, they're able to securely push their information back into the application. And then we have one that we just released in January that is for PACE organizations, which is all-inclusive care for the elderly. And it allows for the doctors and nurses to use iPads to manage their medications, manage e-prescribing for those patients, and that information is transferred to our pharmacy at Care Kinesis for them to do medication therapy management and reconciliation. And they use messaging instead of phone calls to communicate back and forth. No fax, no phone.
You talked about the HIPAA compliance of the cloud. Can you just expand that a little bit? Obviously, you must have thought about that as you put those applications in place.
Sure.
What are the particular aspects that are relevant to the cloud? Is the question?
Sure.
Talking about the HIPAA compliance nature of the cloud itself, you put that as one of the issues that you talked about as you were developing cloud-based applications. I just wondered if you could help us through that a little bit more.
Sure. Basically, when we look at that, number one, just general good standard application security, right? There's no way to get into any of our applications without going through an encrypted SSL certification. And then the other side is around the database. Again, the database is where your data is and lives. And instead of storing, every web application should always be using encryption to store passwords, regardless of how much encryption you have. Well, you think of that with HIPAA data the same way. Use encryption to store your social security numbers. Use encryption to store your date of birth. Use your encryption inside the database, and it's very easy with open source tools to do that. And then the last side is just really manage that firewall so that only 443 or port 80 can really get access. And port 80 should just be a pingable access. Everything should be going through port 443 in encryption.
I'm sorry to expand this point. Obviously, when you're putting an healthcare application like that in place, where you've got protected healthcare information and a covered entity for people who are providing the data, you must put a business associate agreement in place. The BAA protects, it's the agreement that you put in place between the people who are providing the service and the people who are providing the data.
Absolutely.
In regards to the cloud, who do you put the BAA in place with?
Yep. That's a great question. If you're using a software as a service, then you would put that with that cloud vendor. For example, Salesforce. You would put that business advocate agreement with Salesforce. If you're using Amazon and their infrastructure, that is who's supporting it. So Jack Russell Software is responsible for that data. They are just infrastructure. It's sort of the same thing with if you purchase Dell servers, right? And you put them into your closet, you don't need a business advocate agreement with Dell. With the infrastructure as a service, again, they're PCI compliant, they're SAS 70, but you don't need, to my knowledge, a business associate agreement, because at the end of the day, they're giving you their platform, but you're responsible for the security.
So if I was doing an application with you, Jack Russell was creating it in a cloud-based application, MUSC would contract a BAA with Jack Russell and with Amazon, who is also providing the cloud. Both of you.
I'm not sure about that one bit. And again, it's always safe to get as much documentation as possible. But one of the things that's more important is not even getting that, but understanding who can read and who owns the data, right? So Amazon Web Services does not own the data that you put on it, okay? Google App Engine does own the data. So if you were to use Google, then you would need a business agreement to use that. So again, know your cloud vendor, a Terramark or Amazon. They provide the infrastructure, and it's really you who are providing it, whether it's in Jack Russell's closet or in Amazon or on a dedicated hosting environment. It's Jack Russell Software that's providing that service.